going to go ahead and get started. First of all, welcome everybody. And before we get going, Mayor Gaddis, if you'll lead us in the pledge, that would be great. Thank you. It is good to be here today, and I'm sorry I missed the first meeting, but you wouldn't have wanted me here anyway. I would have spread the good word, and you all would have been on your back. But doing much better, thank you. And obviously, this is an awesome group, and lots of energy in the room, and excited about the year ahead. You keep getting better and better news as we move along. You know, I had a wonderful event out on the beaches, the media day out there. We got to throw a little sand around, but it was amazing, the work that has gone on out there. And it kind of just, from that, at least the visual standpoint, it's like we're ready. We're ready for visitors. So really, really excited about some of the improvements in our inventory and, you know, availability and some of the trips that are planned to let people know all is good here. So really upbeat, and just a special thank you to you all around this room, around this table, because you bring vision, you bring your hard-earned perspective to us, and our county commission obviously listens intently to what you all have to say and your advice in that. So it's really a good time, and I'm looking forward to the coming year. With that, let's go ahead and just do a quick introduction around the room, and we'll start way down there. Go ahead.
Good morning. Chuck Prather of the Birchwood, St. Petersburg.
Good morning. Tricia Rodriguez for the Traffic Sport Tours and the Clearwater Ferry.
Good morning. Dave Gaddis, Mayor of Bel Air Beach, representing the Big C.
Dylan Hubbard, Hubbard's Marina.
Amanda Coffey with the County Attorney's Office.
Let's go, Clyde. Go ahead.
Clyde Smith, Biltmore Beach Resort, Treasure Island.
Doreen Moore, TRS, Travel Resort Services, Vacation Rentals.
Bruce Rector, Mayor of the City of Clearwater.
Chris Lotwell, Pinellas County Commission.
Russ Kimball, Sheraton Sand Key, Clearwater Beach.
Brian Loack, Visit St. Pete, Clearwater.
All right, and Dave Eggers, Chair of the County Commission and Chair of this board this year. And I didn't get to welcome you last month, Commissioner Latvala. It's good to have you here. And you know, he's known for giving me a hard time all the time, so I'm sure he'll continue doing that at this meeting. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. You have a motion for approval of the minutes, please.
Second.
Motion and a second. Did you get that? Yeah. Yeah. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Move on to public comments. Is there anybody in the room that signed up? Nobody signed up for public comments, and we will get started right away. And I guess we'll start with our legislative update. And Tristan Summer, who's our intergovernmental liaison. Tristan, come on up. Tristan has a really great background in this business. We went up a couple weeks ago now to visit our legislators and our lobbyist that's up there. And when you walk around with our lobbyist and Tristan, it's like they've paved the way for us to get in to see people. Very adept at what he does. He keeps us updated on everything, and I'm sure have a good report this morning to at least update us on what's going on. We just couldn't be happier to have you, Tristan. Thank you for all that you're doing for us.
Perfect, thank you. So with that being said, I guess I'm wrapped up here. No, but I know most of you already, but once again, I'm Tristan Summer. I'm the intergovernmental liaison with Pinellas County. Before that, I was working with Representative Cheney, so very familiar with the Southwest beaches on that front. So to start, I'll just kind of give you a snapshot as to where we are in session right now. So we're a little past the halfway point. This is the time where subcommittee meetings, at least on the policy side, stop meeting, right? So that's where the big committees, so State Affairs, Commerce, Budget, they start taking up more of the policy discussions, and then in turn, those start to phase out, and then we adopt more floor sessions, longer floor sessions in the House and the Senate, right? So kind of where we are right now. Within that, too, the budget's just released last week. So looking at Visit Florida, this is kind of the first time, Brian and I were talking about this earlier, where the House, Senate, and the governor's proposal all came in at $80 million. So that is a good sign. Not really a controversial element. So at least a great place to start the negotiations moving into conference. With that being said, we're not really sure when conference is going to be because we don't have tax packages out yet. And that was one of the elements that kind of upheld the conversations at the end of last session, leading into an extended session. So with that being said, you should have a one-pager in front of you giving you kind of a rundown on kind of where the TDT bills are, what they look like. A disclaimer, all these bills appear to be dead. So I think that's a good foundation to start with. So it doesn't look like any of this policy is moving forward, but giving you a rundown on what these bills kind of accomplish. That first one, Senate Bill 458, it reduces the mandated portion of TDT revenue for promotion and advertisement from 40 to 20%. And if a local government meets that 20% threshold, they can use those funds for public facilities. The second bill, and also too, I should also say too, anything that doesn't have a House bill is also essentially dead because you would need a bill in both chambers too. So it's a good disclaimer to start with that too. But Senate Bill 456 adds public safety improvements to authorize uses for TDT revenues to support increased tourism essentially. The third one is the bill companions that actually could have theoretically moved with ease because there was a House and Senate sponsor, and that would allow counties greater flexibility in allocating TDT revenue by removing fixed advertising requirements. But once again, no appetite to take up that policy, so neither has moved. Too many committee stops as well. Fourth is Senate Bill 446, and that provides a definition for large-scale county destination marketing organization, and that's basically any operating budget of more than $5 million, and any organization that meets that basically that allocation would have to register with the Department of State. And then they have new regulatory restrictions thereafter, but once again, the bill hasn't moved yet. And then the last one is Senate Bill 976, and that authorizes TDT revenue to fund certain commuter rail service operations. And there hasn't really been an appetite in Tallahassee to kind of expand that use regardless over the last 5, 10, 15 years either. So that policy probably won't end up anywhere regardless. But with that being said, TDT can pop up in the tax packages, and because we don't have a tax package released in the House or Senate other than miscellaneous proposals, we're still kind of monitoring what that situation is going to look like. We had a conversation with one of our legislative delegation members a few weeks ago whenever we were in Tallahassee, and she did caution us that she is hearing that there potentially could be some TDT-related policy coming up in the tax package. So once again, that's at the forefront of our focus, and it's one of the things that we're monitoring. And that kind of gives TDT and Visit Florida rundown on everything happening in Tallahassee right now.
And any of those comments that they were making about what might pop up, was there any central theme to those, or just kind of?
No substance, at least at this time. I think the rumblings have been expanding uses, right? So opening up what you can use TDT revenue for, which if you're opening up the revenue, obviously, without also increasing the funding allocation to, that could become a little bit problematic, but no details at this time.
Any questions for Tristan? Anybody? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the Senate has usually been our hope that they will stop TDC. House goes, Senate usually kills it. So this year I can only hope if it's out of the tax package we can count on that again. But do you have any crystal ball? Now we've got new leadership coming in next year in both House and Senate. So do you think that appetite is going to be picked up back up next year? Is there any rumblings on that discussion?
We had a crystal ball, but no, there hasn't been rumblings. What I would say is that the incoming Senate president, he represents Manatee County, right? So there is attention on the beachfront there. So I think that posture would probably be retained within the Senate if I had to assume based on former trends. But it hasn't come up in conversation at this time. Any other questions?
My second question is, I think it's real estate tax. I mean, I think it's tourism related because real estate taxes affect how businesses run. And right now, the theory that they're going to take real estate taxes residential, is there any talk of shifting that burden onto businesses, which could be catastrophic in the tourism side?
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically, giving you a snapshot at where we are right now too. So the House has put out their 8 proposals, ranging from a complete elimination of property taxes to phased out property taxes to basically only addressing it for, first-time home buyers, right? So many different policy items to choose from. And the Senate hasn't released an idea, right? There have been rumblings that they're expecting an additional reduced additional homestead property tax exemption too. Once again, that number hasn't necessarily been finalized and they haven't released their proposal yet. But in terms of the cost shifting now, that's been a point that's been raised by, I want to say, the Chamber of Commerce, or the various chambers of commerce, as well as the Association of Counties and the League of Cities, that essentially if you're going to be removing homestead property tax, you're going to have a cost shifting exercise. So is that a fee for service? And these are questions that have been posed publicly, right? So is it a fee for service? Do you shift the burden to businesses? Do you shift the burden to renters thereafter? So there hasn't really been an ironed out way or plan in terms of how that would be implemented. I know some of the bill sponsors of the House proposals have deferred to the implementing bill. The implementing bills have not been filed, so that would have to come next legislative session. So theoretically, what that would mean is there would be a passed bill. It would have to be approved by the voters by referendum, and if something is approved, then the legislature would come back and implement basically those changes, ratify those changes. So the conversation has come up, but there hasn't been necessarily a plan in terms of how that would be implemented, if that makes sense.
And lastly is really for Mayor Rector, is probably the person to answer it. We have our chief financial officer going around the state with a talking tour, and basically his point is, pre-COVID, cities ran their governments very efficiently. Once COVID came in, the federal government threw dollars at cities and for needed reasons. And now flash forward 6 years later, the budgets still have this, what he calls inflated numbers. If you just take your budget back to 2019 and use CPI as an increase and go back to that level of government, you can absorb this, and that would be the cost shifting of it. But I don't know if that's viable or it's just CFO / the governor trying to, trial balloon, float an idea. So.
Well, they've certainly been leaning on all municipalities and county governments to be more efficient with tax dollars. I think one of the things that's not recognized is we just completed our collective bargaining agreement negotiations with fire and police last year, and those salaries, the compensation we have to pay essential service workers for city and county governments has gone up, too. So some of that, all that increase in property tax revenues we've collected is not all, adding on things that folks, really didn't want, unnecessary items. And so I've been trying to make that point too. And then the other thing too is the pending proposals for somehow reforming property taxes that will mean, if they do impact our real property tax revenues, means communities are going to have to make some choices. And we've been able to use our property tax revenues to maintain a quality of life, not just in Clearwater, but in Pinellas County, throughout Tampa Bay, that I think it's important. And Mayor Gaddis has mentioned it in a prior meeting. It's really important that our citizens understand that if we're not receiving those tax revenues like we currently are, we're going to have to make some hard choices on some of the things that we provide that the community expects because they increase our quality of life here. But it's going to be challenging for a lot of, particularly the smaller municipalities, to keep the service levels the same as what the citizens have expected.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Tristan, to follow up Chuck's question, is there some other bills that you're following for the county that we should be informed about, or a little educational for us?
Yeah, so there are bills of impact. So sovereign immunity being one of them. So the House and Senate bills historically remain separate. The House bill basically raises the cap for single claims to $600,000, and then for basically incidents 1.2 million by 2031. And you're also allowed to settle above those caps. So essentially that means those caps are kind of a gray area regardless. And then the Senate bills, I want to say the number comes to $300,000 per case, and then $400,000 per incident too. So those numbers are very far apart. And historically, the sovereign immunity bills are two bills that end up in negotiations to the final day of session. And obviously they haven't really settled anywhere. Also, the Senate bill requires to have, I think, 5-year adjustments to CPI that would be kind of reviewed by the Department of Revenue. So that's one we're keeping our eye on. The Senate bill just passed its second committee stop. The House bill has already passed off the floor, so traction in both chambers. There are other bills captured by our legislative program. There's a beach management bill right now that's moving around too that the legislative intent is fine for the bill sponsors too, but it kind of undermines some of the efforts that the county has made on the federal level too. So we're working with the bill sponsors and as well as leadership to kind of identify what those setbacks might be, unintended consequences. And a lot of the policy, though, that has been moving in Tallahassee, they're either passing one chamber or dying in another one or not moving at all regardless. So it's basically the same situation that we were in last year where there was also leadership in the Senate that acknowledged this too, where one chamber is just planning on passing their bills and then the other chamber is going to pass their bills and they're going to fall to negotiations at the very end. So we'll see kind of where that lands in the grand scheme of it.
Yeah, Tristan, any further conversation about special sessions on the tax issue, or do you think it's going to be taken care of during?
Well, we're running a little behind schedule from last year's session to this year's session too, so that's probably an indicator that it's going to be more difficult to pass a budget and tax package in time, especially because we don't have a tax package yet in either chamber. So, and typically the tax package has to be resolved before the budgets can pass. So if the tax package isn't released in either this week or next week, we're probably going to be looking at an extended session regardless, just because of the timeline. It'll be difficult to meet those milestones needed in order to have a budget on the desk Tuesday, the last week of session, which would be March 11th or 10th. So needless to say, no writing on the wall yet, but it seems like it's trending into a more extended session posture.
It seemed like when we had our legislative delegation here, we were talking about the comment, Chuck, that you brought up, which is if you take it away from here, it's got to go someplace, and it was like apartment renters and our commercial businesses, and that's not something that they're excited about doing either. So again, without the alternative, and when we talked to a couple of senators up there on our trip, they were not optimistic that there would be much other than maybe some increased exemptions. So we'll see how that all pans out. Any other questions for Tristan? Do you have anything, Mayor?
Chairman, I might weigh in on that. You know what, we were up there last week, and I think, if you talk to legislators, they're hopeful they can get it all done. They'd rather not to have it dragged out. A number of them are up for election in the fall, so they'd like to get the session over and get it. They don't feel like maybe the governor's office is quite as anxious to get the session over, and it may drag out for that reason. I think on what I got out of the real property tax conversation is, though, that no one really knows what's going to happen. As municipal leaders, I think we're preparing for the worst, kind of thinking through what things we would do. And then there was also, a conversation I had one night with someone who's a group that's done some polling, and it's not necessarily a done deal that if it made the ballot that the voters would approve it. When they poll people and they ask them about understanding reduction in services, they're not quite as excited about reducing real property taxes. So I think that the consensus is that there'll be some modification to homestead exemption for folks who live here full-time and use their homestead as their primary residence, but even that would impact, significantly some of the smaller municipalities. So, but I was encouraged by the visit in that I don't think just because it's going to be on the ballot that our citizens necessarily, when they take into account reduction of services and quality of life we enjoy here in Florida, will necessarily approve it. And so, but if you talk to legislators, I don't think any of them know where it's headed.
Yes, and so also the Speaker of the House last week, and I think the House Budget Chair too, they made that comment. They said, I don't have a crystal ball, so I'm not really sure where the story is going to end. So they're speaking to the Senate, obviously trying to get them to come to the table in terms of providing a tax package offer, property tax offer specifically too, so some sort of reconciliation can happen as they move forward within the dialogue. But yeah, that's a great point. There has been the comment as to where we are kind of within that scope.
Anybody else? Tristan, thank you. Appreciate your being here.
Thank you all.
All right, let's go on to some destination metrics. And Eddie is here? Yeah.
Well, good morning and happy to be here and glad everyone's feeling good. So let's just jump into the destination metrics for this month. You might remember me up here last year. We had a record December of 2024, fiscal year 2025. This year we had about 6.2 million in collections. That's actually up from fiscal year 2024. It's not up from last year, and as you recall, this was really kind of the peak period where we had a lot of displacement from the storms. So a lot of that revenue last year in TDT was not always from the same visitor patterns that we expect. Just glancing at the first quarter, we had about 17.6 million in TDT collections. So we're actually right in between last year and fiscal year 2024, not far off from fiscal year 2024, which is great to see. Jumping back into December, the areas in bold on this chart are really the areas that have TDT revenues above fiscal year 2024. It's something that we're keeping our eye on in terms of looking at really kind of where that sustained growth and demand is. It's great to see the vacation rentals, Clearwater Beach, St. Petersburg up there, but we're also keeping our eye on, Oldsmar, Dunedin, some of these other areas. And the hope, too, is that obviously the areas that are down from the past couple of years, we continue to see that demand come back online, that supply come back online, and really visitation come back to those areas as they recover from the storms. Just glancing at the CoStar hotel sample, you can kind of see what these differences look like from this specific sector. So overall, from fiscal year 2024, our supply is still down about 2%, and our demand is down just 1%. Hotel revenue, however, is making up the difference because of the increased kind of room rates that have grown from the past couple of years. And obviously, again, from fiscal year 2025, you can kind of see that impact of the hurricane displacement in that demand and revenue. It is great to see, though, that we are obviously up in supply from last year. Just kind of looking at some additional patterns that we saw during this time. So in the month of December, we really saw nearly 70% of people book within that November-December timeline who stayed in the month of December. All others were a little bit further away. So one thing that we really identified during this time is that there's a window for us to act kind of within these first couple of months. And there's some other trip patterns too that we are also looking at and paying attention to. It's great to see the number of check-ins actually was up despite the length of stay coming down again from the displacement. And the booking window was up a little bit from last year, which is what we expect, and the rate was a little bit down. But as we kind of look at these different patterns, and this looks at the origin market, we saw really the state of Florida bringing a lot of visitation during the month of December. Tampa, St. Petersburg, Clearwater obviously is that largest area, and the yellow chart marks last year, so you can kind of see that difference in that graph, and it really drove a lot of that demand from last year. But looking at our top 10 markets, we see Tampa, New York City, Orlando, Miami, Chicago. So again, really those Florida markets make up a lot. We were very successful in our PTO campaign during this year, which generated about 500 room nights kind of measured across our marketing channels. And, this was really targeted at getting people to consider a trip during November and December to the Florida markets. So it's great that, our campaign was right on with the visitation patterns that we were seeing during this time. Looking ahead at the next couple of months, I think that we're seeing a brighter picture more and more, which is very encouraging for us to see. So overall, our pacing for the next couple of months, the hotel revenue kind of sample that we're seeing, and this is coming from Key Data Amadeus, we are up compared to last year in the month of March, still slightly down from 2 years ago, which was, again, a record-breaking March for us. But we're up quite a bit in the hotel revenue that's currently on the books for the month of April compared to the past couple of years. And then in May, we're really competitive to those last 2 years, and it's kind of a shorter booking window timeline. So we're hopeful that that might even grow as we kind of get closer to those dates. So sort of some positive momentum as we're looking forward and kind of looking at the different origin markets where that momentum is coming from. We see really Philadelphia bringing a lot of visitation. Thank you to the city of Clearwater for, your wonderful spring training experience. But also New York, Chicago, Washington, D.C., a lot of those kind of target markets for us where there's a big metro population. They're coming back and coming to visit us, which is great. It also speaks to our marketing investments last year where we did invest quite a bit in New York and Chicago and DC in those markets. We also still see sustained visitation from Tampa, St. Petersburg, Clearwater. So, our local and kind of regional markets appear to be doing it quite well as well. And then, kind of rounding out that top 10 is Detroit, Boston, Minneapolis, Orlando, and Atlanta. That is kind of my report for now. I know I'm going to stay up here for a little bit more, but can I answer any questions for you guys?
Yes, Phil.
We've been back and forth on this quite a bit. Years ago, we thought everything was from the north, and then more recently, you said that I-4 corridor was really a driver. Is that mainly in the summer that would be, or?
Well,
showing here.
Yeah, it's funny enough. We were actually looking at Orlando and kind of the state of Florida in a marketing meeting yesterday. There's really kind of a sustained travel pattern. There are ups and downs during certain periods. So looking more kind of within the spring shoulder season, we see more of an opportunity to kind of drive some of that I-4 traffic over here, as well as kind of in June, July is another pattern that we see. Obviously it's the same. Florida is always hot, and it's even more hot in the middle of the state. So I think as long as we have, an ocean and the wonderful beaches that we've continued to make investments on, I think we're going to continue to drive not just, the I-4 patterns that we've traditionally seen, but as more people relocate and, start to live kind of on that I-75 pattern too, we've seen a lot more visitation coming up from areas like Bradenton and Sarasota and Venice, which just speak to their development and growth and our ability to kind of entice them to come up here.
Anybody else? Yeah, Chuck.
Great report as always. I appreciate it. When we look at December hotel guests, and I put a question on Washington, D.C., are we talking Baltimore? Are we talking the greater Virginia, Baltimore /
Yeah, there's about 4 or 5 kind of areas that are included in the actual report. So I can get the specific names of what those are included. For simplicity, I've just summarized it as DC, but it's a mixture of areas in the hotel revenue report that we receive.
And I was surprised, when you look at March, of course, we've got spring training. Philly makes perfect sense. But you look at some of our more traditional markets that do come in here, Philly being one of them that's missing in December, and there's a few of them. Any idea why those, what are traditionally major visitors in Florida, didn't come in December from Philly, from Boston, Chicago was in there, but.
Yeah, so kind of speaking towards why the Philadelphia isn't up here, other places. I mean, I can say that I think we get quite a large amount of our visitation from the top kind of few markets, and then every other sort of market that we get really sort of kind of levels off. So I'm sure that, Philadelphia is not far away from this sort of top 10, but in terms of the overall impact, there's really a kind of dynamic change that we see, especially in the month of December in some of these kind of more shoulder season markets where it's not always, necessarily the Philadelphia traffic. And I would have to kind of confirm, but, other things that could have affected this compared to last year could even be, during the month of Philadelphia, if the Buccaneers played the Eagles, right, during that month, then we may suspect to see a spike in December. So I didn't kind of go back and check for those bigger mile markers, but, that could be a possibility too that might have a role.
We're missing
Yeah.
some of those big, but thank you. It was interesting to see. Thanks.
Yeah, Phil.
So are these hard numbers, or are these extrapolated from a sample?
These are hard numbers. They're not the total market. It is numbers of a sample. It is based on, I don't want to just throw out numbers kind of willy-nilly, but CoStar kind of presents our largest hotel sample. Key Data Amadeus represents, I would say, when we compare those samples side to side, about half of the sample that they represent. So if CoStar represents, a large portion of the market, let's say around 70 to 75%, you can kind of get an idea for how representative a sample is. It is a large amount of data, but obviously it's from specific sources. So, we do have to kind of keep some of that in mind too when we look at those. But it does give us a direct sample of data that we can, look at.
Thanks. Anybody else? Yes, Doreen.
Yes, Eddie, thank
Yes.
you. Speaking of data and samples, I just was asking in my conversation with Brian, I think it would be worth mentioning that you're getting updated statistics, which is why we don't have the vacation rental metrics here, unrelated to your ability to drill down. You pictured you found some anomalies that needed to be addressed, and so could we expect that updated data before the next meeting, just to kind of fill in?
Yeah, absolutely. So our provider, Key Data, the good news is that they've increased, we have an increased sample of source data that is coming to us. Some of that data did not come with the historical numbers. So when we were looking at that year over year, there was a larger discrepancy. We didn't want to present data that had that included. They've told us it should be removed by Thursday. So I should, by the end of this week, be able to provide this report with those updated numbers.
Thanks. Anybody else? All right, thank you for that. Appreciate it. You're right, stay there. And then Kylie, come on up, and Akai, come on up, and we'll get into this discussion, which I think is a good, it'll get the blood going a little bit. I think it's an important topic, and I know that, I had some thoughts just about transition away from the old to the new way of doing it for some of our events that might get caught up in all of it, but looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Commissioner. Good morning. I'm Kylie Diaz, Vice President of Community Engagement with Visit St. Pete Clearwater, and today I am here along with my Director of Digital and Data, Eddie Kirsch. We are here today to share enhancements to our elite event data. This is a nearly year-long effort to independently measure event attendance and estimate economic impact. As stewards of bed tax dollars, it is important to us that event funding decisions are grounded in credible, independently verified data, ensuring a fair, transparent process and reinvesting in the events that truly drive visitation and benefit our community. Historically, we relied on self-reported attendance from event organizers. While that provided insight, we recognized that there were tools available that would allow us to strengthen and modernize our methodology. To accomplish this, we partnered with a local firm, Street Level One, to implement a multi-layered data strategy, including mobile traffic analytics through Placer AI, on-site data capture, drone attendance verification, and detailed event footprint mapping. Placer AI samples data from millions of mobile devices and extrapolates foot traffic patterns. While powerful, we chose to validate those estimates with on-the-ground cameras and drone data to ensure the highest level of accuracy. Collecting the data was only the first step. Translating it into actionable insights was critical. Thank you to Eddie Kirsch, we now have the ability to convert verified attendance into measurable economic impact, allowing us to evaluate performance with better confidence. Eddie will now walk through real-world examples from the past year to illustrate how this model works in practice. And unless there's anything pressing, we're going to hold questions to the end. Is that okay with everyone? Okay.
Well, thanks, Kylie. I feel like it wasn't all my idea, so please don't. No, don't just, prosecute me if you guys have. No, I'm kidding. So what I kind of wanted to illustrate here, and this is one look at what we've been doing sort of behind the scenes, but obviously when we look at the different events that we receive, organizers have all different sorts of ways to sort of report that event attendance, how big they feel like the footprint was. And traditionally, we've used some of that organizer reporting to try to evaluate the economic impact and evaluate, this program. So one thing that we wanted to do was essentially have an independent tool. What we got was Placer AI and Street Level 1, which essentially looks at the incoming visitation into a geo-targeted footprint. It can identify essentially a number of mobile devices and then extrapolate that data to come up with an estimate. When we compare that to some of the methodology that some of the event organizers were using, we got some interesting numbers. So I kind of want to give A, B, and C of these examples. First off, the first event that I wanted to compare had ticketing data, but not only did they have ticketing data, they also would survey their guests. So they would understand essentially the travel party size of not just the competitors in the competition, but the overall number of people that they felt like was being brought to the event. Our measured attendance from the footprint that we got was about 22,134 compared to, or I'm sorry, 21,995 compared to the 22,134, about a less than 0.5% difference between that methodology. The event B that I'm going to kind of give as my example is we just received the ticketing data for the number of days that they had at the event, and we tallied that together, and it was about 16,400 compared to the measured attendance of 12,992. So we sort of recognize the difference in the methodology here, and understand that people could go to the same event multiple days in a row, and so you would have more tickets sold than necessarily the number of attendants. We would, the difference here was about 20%, but still essentially within the ballpark if you kind of look at the overall numbers. Gives us kind of a good idea of maybe the follow-up conversation for, how to maybe better measure attendance for that event. Event C, we got an estimate based on kind of the overall footprint size of the event and crowd size estimates sort of measured visually throughout the period of the event. And we got an event attendance of about 45,000 from the organizer compared to about 26,300 of our measured attendance. So obviously here we kind of have a difference of opinion that we need to try to better understand and maybe better get some reporting data from the event organizers while they're conducting the event. What we can do with the event attendance and what we have begun to do is try to understand the economic evaluation in a repeatable process that is economic and efficient for us. So we looked at the Destinations International Event Impact Calculator, which is one of the industry standards for measuring event attendance. It's also, essentially widely variable. So we had to kind of pick and choose the inputs that we were going to use into this event impact tool. Our visitor estimate is the most important one, but the other things that we had to measure against was the out-of-town share of visitors, the overnight share of those visitors, the room rate of those dates, the travel party size of the people arriving, how many people were arriving by air, ticket price, event dates, event type. All of those different metrics and inputs go into the calculator, and the calculator is able to give us essentially an estimate of the direct sales total economic impact, estimated room demand, overnight and day attendees, and the leisure tax return for us. We begun to do this across all of the events that we had in the last fiscal year that we could measure against to get kind of a better estimate of this program based on that methodology to feel like, understanding the total impact of the program. So we were able to do this in 24 measured events for fiscal year 2025. We had nearly 600,000 attendees, 83 million in direct impact, 148 million in total economic impact, 4.2 million in local taxes generated, about 2.16 million in bed tax generated, about nearly 155,000 overnight attendees, and about 145,000 room nights. So it kind of gives us the ability to kind of evaluate our return as we put forward investments in energy towards these events.
And I would just add to that, that list that you just saw with ROI, that is not even the whole, that is not all the programs that were funded through the 2025 Elite Events program. That was the first, 24 to 30 events, and we had over 40 events. So you can see the numbers there that stick out. Just on, we funded at about $2.2 million. So we essentially get back our entire investment through bed tax collections. And on top of that, we get a 2-to-1 ROI in local taxes. So that's sales tax as well that's being reinvested in the community through these. So this is something that we haven't had in the past and haven't been able to show. We did to some degree, but this has better accuracy and again, is really going to help us make decisions moving into the future. And I'm just really proud of the team for putting this together.
I mean, I think it's just amazing how we're getting this down to even a better science on our return for our dollars. And one of the concerns that I had, I shared just briefly, and I just, if you could just like tell me the things that you guys were kind of planning, the heads up you gave last year, the planning for this year, and then maybe, I was saying, well, one more year to kind of smooth that transition out a little bit, but just could you talk to that just a minute? Yeah.
So I would just caution that is the next presentation.
Okay.
But this data, this is what we've been working on the last year. And when we were here a year ago and we were doing Elite Events, we gave the event organizers a heads up that we were looking at some new technology, and it was born out of financial necessity. The cost to go out and send a survey collector out to every single Elite event to get an economic impact study back was getting to be too much. So we needed to find a more economical way to do it. But then once we did that, we found, in addition to getting the data for a far better price, we're actually getting far more accurate data. So this year we've been working through the kinks. We're still going to continue to learn and retool. But they've been working on this for a year, and again, this is when we said last year the direction we were going. This is it.
Thank you. Yeah, Dylan.
Thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting, and it's been really interesting to learn all the ways that we're getting to this data. On the economic evaluation slide, I'm following how we're getting the visitor estimate and the out-of-town share from the geofence cell phone data, and you can see where that comes in from. Yeah. But how do we get to some of these other input variables, like for example, if they arrive by air? Is that through Placer AI as well?
Actually, that is not. So another valuable resource that we are able to utilize for this is our visitor profile. We are able to filter that data to look at in the month that that event occurred, filtering out the past couple of years of data, and if that survey response attended an event, basically get a sample and an idea of the overnight share of the festival attendees during that month, as well as that travel party size data, the arrival by air data. So other metrics we're essentially pulling in from our visitor profile survey responses. So kind of still using surveys in this calculation, just using it through the means that we're already collecting surveys from.
Interesting. Data layers.
Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you.
Anybody? Yes.
Thank you, Commissioner. Great presentation. I think this is a great direction to go. I've always questioned the organizer estimates, even in the days that I was one of them, giving those numbers. So I think to get the real numbers and also to know that you're adjusting some of the levels, which is the next presentation, to realistically, but not just cutting people off. I think it's a great approach to it. Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes, Philip.
So this is strictly Elite Events, right?
This is just measured Elite Events, yep.
We had 40? You measured 40 in a year? Is it that high now? There's something down the line. Well, I think it's outstanding that we got almost 100% of our investment back as far as the bed tax generated. I'm not sure what it costs to review all this. It's less than it was in the past, but I don't know how much resources are going into that. But given the next presentation, I think we're going to drive those dollars even farther. We'll probably end up with a positive net gain. So.
And Mr. Henderson, I would also note that, we started going this direction, thinking about these elite events and event attendee figures. We're also using this same technology. Kylie's worked with the Chambers of Commerce that are in our chamber funding program. And again, as we evaluated that program and how we determine fund distributions for our partner chambers, one of the things was attendance, and how many people are going through the Chambers Visitor Center's doors. And the numbers that we were getting were obtained through various methods, and so now this is a consistent way to get accurate data for visitation, foot traffic at visitor centers, visitor events. So it's not, the technology is just not being used for events, it's also being used for another program with our chambers.
Highly efficient. Thank you.
Did you have, yeah, Mayor?
Yeah, it's fantastic, the information you get. And we, City of Clearwater, we've started using it too, Placer AI, and it's just, we had a presentation yesterday. It's just really helpful for us. For us, in learning the type of visitor to Coachman Park, they did a example of the Market Marie, which the previous weekend, just showing where those folks are going to, and they showed us statistics on where they went after they left the event. What businesses they visited after they left the event. But for us in Clearwater, it was helpful too to also see what events are we having in Clearwater that are attracting locals, what are attracting visitors out from the beach to downtown Clearwater. And I think that's the exciting thing for this group is, what are these events are truly drawing folks from out of town, because that's real. Who are likely staying in a hotel room, which generates revenues that allow us to do the wonderful things Visit St. Pete Clearwater does. So this is just fantastic. Is a lot of data, to Mr. Henderson's point. You can spend maybe too much time analyzing it all, getting in too far in the weeds, but I think it's just fantastic, and I hope we'll continue to leverage this and use it, because I think it's really going to help us evaluate these events and decide what should be, maybe a local organization's responsibility for funding and what should be Visit St. Pete Clearwater's responsibility.
Yes, Chuck.
Thank you, Chair. This is just a quick comment. Kylie, you said in your opening remarks, we have to be good stewards of our bed tax dollars, and that just is so important in our whole mission. So to put the effort to do this report and to go forward using all that data, we're staying transparent, which is what we promised the citizens and the politicians in Tallahassee that we would in this new era of TDC. So I just thank you, because it allows us to move forward and make our argument why it's so important to maintain advertising and tourism.
Yeah, Chuck, thank you for that
Chuck,
comment.
and if I can just respond to that, that's actually one of the exact reasons why we didn't, when we were looking at Placer, we also wanted to verify it through other methods, because we were like, okay, this is a great tool, but we're not 100% sure that this is a great tool. We need to make sure that we verify it against these other methods. And so that's why we did that kind of data layering strategy to make sure that those numbers that we were seeing were accurate. So,
Yeah, and I think to your point, I think our legislators will appreciate that as it relates to what Tristan was saying. All these bills that kind of come up and they kind of go away. There seems to be a belief or a trust, and this has only increased that we're doing good things with the dollars. So, Trish, did you have something?
I was just going to echo the comments about how fantastic this is, to say it's fair, accountable, and transparent. So thank you so much for it. It's really fantastic.
Thanks, Trish. Anybody else? Okay. And we'll jump right into the elite funding. Morning, Craig.
Good morning, everyone. Craig Campbell, Director of Community and Brand Engagement for Visit St. Pete Clearwater. Thank you, Chair Eggers. Thank you, Brian, for the opportunity. An awesome job. Kudos to Kylie and Eddie. They've, done just a fabulous job, obviously, on the data side of things, and really set the stage for this conversation about elite events. So, now that the data piece is really starting to take shape, I wanted to walk through how we're now leveraging that data and improving our funding program accordingly. So let's dive in here. And shout out to the full team. Everyone you see over to my left at the back left corner here, they've been a part of this discussion for the past 2-3 months. A lot of time and effort and energy poured into these changes, but thrilled to walk you through it here today. So our priorities as we are diving into the guidelines and starting to make some changes. Number one here, continue to fund events that drive visitation, awareness, and economic impact. Data-informed decision-making. We heard all the things on the data side just now. Transparency and eliminating subjectivity. We want to make this as crystal clear and black and white as possible, not only on our side of things, but on the organizer's side as well. And we want to incentivize events to increase promotional spending. I'll touch on this here momentarily again. High-level proposed changes that we are presenting today. Number one and number two go hand in hand. So revise our funding categories and eligibility. We'll walk through those changes shortly. The attendee and visitor figures will be based on data gathered by Visit St. Pete Clearwater. Kind of described in another way, instead of utilizing forward-looking projections when considering these applications, we are now using an event's most recent actuals to determine funding levels. Point number 3 here, clarify allowable marketing expenses and broadcast viewership. You can check out section 2 definitions for what exactly we mean by those two items. And then 1 year only, Brian touched on this a short minute ago here, but we are proposing events may not see a reduction in funding of more than 50%. If they're in the program this year and find themselves on the outside looking in, they would still receive 50% of this year's funding. And some rationale behind that, we understand this is going to be a pretty big shock to the system for some of these event organizers. But to Brian's point earlier, they've been advised close to a full year now that changes are coming. Don't get too comfortable with your current funding levels. There's going to be some robust changes in the pipeline. So we do think this kind of phasing out approach will help soften that blow. And we also want to give organizers a chance to kind of beef up their numbers this year. Use of funding. Just a quick slide here. There was some dialogue, conversation last year about kind of the split. How are we going to use those funds? So we have defined that a little more clearly again this year. So category 1 events, 100% of those funds will be allocated towards marketing or sponsorship at VSPC's discretion. And then every other event, categories 2 through 5, 50% of those funds, again, towards marketing and or sponsorship at our discretion, but then 50% allocated towards hosting fees with no restriction. We would receive a baseline package of benefits, so things like logo placement on the website, signage, booth at the event, website, et cetera. That would be included in that second 50%. All right, now kind of the meat of the changes here. Here's the totally revamped criteria that we're proposing. We'll start at category 1. So maybe the best way to describe category 1 events, those are your high impact and high exposure events. So it might be a little small on the screen there, but they are meeting or exceeding 40,000 attendees, of which 40% are tourists. And they also have 500,000 views on their broadcast, and VSPC's receiving some sort of assets during that broadcast. Could be track signage at the Grand Prix, commercial units, things of that nature. So they're both. They are high impact and high exposure. Once you come down to category 2, it's more of an or proposition. So it's high impact or high exposure. So you may have a festival that has really strong attendance, but no TV component. Okay, then that's a category 2. Or conversely, you may have like a made for TV type event. Great presence on TV, but not so much on the attendance side of things. Still would get in as a category 2. And then you can see things kind of scale down from there. So categories 3, 4, and 5, the attendance thresholds come down, and then the funding, up to funding amounts also scale down accordingly. Circling back to the earlier comment about incentivizing events to increase their promotional spending, this is the roadmap. So if you have an event that's category 4 or 5, and they are looking for more funding, here's how you get there. You need to more than likely spend a little bit more promoting your event to increase your attendance or to increase your percentage of tourists. So we do think that gives some of these organizers a nice carrot. Okay, comparing new guidelines to, or the proposed guidelines to the previous guidelines. I won't go through this entire list here, but two things I wanted to call out. On the left is the FY26 criteria. That's our current guidelines. FY27 is our proposed. So you can actually see we've lowered the attendance thresholds for 4 out of the 5 categories. We went from 50,000 in categories 1 and 2 down to 40,000. And then category 3 went from 20,000 to 15, and category 4 from 10,000 to 7,500. A major shift here as well is you can see the room nights on the left-hand side, which were more guesstimates, versus now we're making these data-informed decisions. We know these events, we know which events drive 40% or higher tourists for their attendance. So, and just kind of, reframing here, if our mission is to fund tourism driving events, we felt it was important to maintain that 40% threshold throughout the new guidelines. Okay, what does this all mean? So similar to how Eddie described, they did a sample of 24 to 30 events. We have a sampling of 30 events as well. We applied the new criteria to these 30 events. They're in the program this year, receiving $2.255 million. So that's on the left-hand side. And then under the new guidelines, just quick high level, category 1, maintain those 2 events that received category 1 last year would stay in category 1 this year. Category 2, we'd actually see an uptick from 4 to 6 events in category 2. Then categories 3 and 4 is where we see a little bit of a drop, where events have some room for improvement. So we're less heavy on the 3s and 4s, and those events are now found in the category 5 or not even qualifying. So out of the 30 events, again, that were sampled, 7 out of those 30 would not qualify under the revised proposed guidelines. But with that 50% rule, would still receive some funding. And then before I move on to the next slide, there's actually a few things I wanted to call out that, in the guidelines themselves. So you should have a clean copy of the guidelines. And on page 2, there are 3 asterisks. So wanted to just read those here, make sure we're all on the same page. But, we did go through a number of different scenarios as we were planning out the guidelines, and there were a few things that we flushed out and specifically addressed here. So the first asterisk, excuse me, unique attendee and tourist figures will be based on third-party data gathered for VSPC at the most recent instance of the event. Okay, check that box. We've talked about all the things data. Second asterisk, here's where it gets interesting. If an applicant believes these figures are not accurate, they must provide VSPC staff with verifiable data that will be assessed for accuracy, and a determination will be made whether the submitted data is acceptable. So if there's a dispute, if an organizer does not agree with our figures, we'll give them every opportunity to state their case, provide, and the key word here is verifiable. But once we've verified, then we're all good. But yeah, we will give folks an opportunity. And then the third asterisk here, if the prior year event was negatively impacted by weather, which happens all the time, or other extraordinary circumstances, applicant must explain in their application. So we'll factor that into consideration here as well. You know, if we have to go back a year or two prior to get a more realistic view of that event, we will certainly explore that. And then a fourth bonus item here, actually down in section D, item 3, first-time events or first-time funded events will be evaluated based on projected attendance, documented success of comparable or past events, and estimated economic impact. So just wanted to throw that out there. Because if it's a new event, we don't have any data on it. So we got to do something. We will look at those new applications, new events through a slightly different lens. But just wanted to call those few things out. And then last slide here, just timeline. So after discussion today, any recommendations will be taken to the BCC on March 24th. Assuming that is approved, then we would open application shortly after that, aim for April 1st. We'd host a public information webinar, walk all the applicants or previous organizers through the new system and what that means to them. And then we'd have a little bit of time. There's no June TDC, so we would prepare our recommendations for you in July, and then BCC final approval in August. So that was a lot. Are there any questions?
So just real quickly, so this is not, the approach that we're doing for fiscal year '26 as proposed, or it's what we've been doing. So the events that are going on this year and the funds that they're looking for this year, this calendar year, the fiscal year, is not being changed. The approach is the same.
That is correct.
So 27, which is next year, what does that look like in terms of the adjustment? You said something about 50%, but if you could just go through that.
Sure. You want?
Craig, can you just make it clear when you talk about 2026 events this year, those were all approved a year ago.
Understand. So that's the point you were making about this year's okay. We're going to use the same approach. We're talking next year.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, events are for FY26. They're already locked in, approved. We're moving forward with agreements. We're executing those deliverables. When we launch the application in April, that will be for FY27, and that's when these changes would potentially take effect.
And the transition year is?
It would be FY27. So, you know, theoretically, an event received $100,000 in funding in FY26, then let's say they did not qualify for funding in FY27, we would still fund them at 50%, which is $50,000.
The following year, we'd be back to, it would be the.
They would be on their own at that point.
Yeah, Dylan.
For those of us less familiar with fiscal years, we're talking October 1, right?
Yes, sir.
So if an event is October 2nd, this is a timeline they would follow to receive funding, and it would be a transition year.
Correct, yes.
Beautiful.
Yeah, Chuck.
So we give these folks funding, and they're theoretically supposed to spend that on marketing their event, which brings more people to their event, which brings more heads and beds. Are they allowed to use any of that funding for anything other than like an advertising position to spend that dollar, an in-house marketing person or something?
So it's defined. If you look on page number 1 under definitions, event marketing, so VSPC can kind of dictate it's our discretion on how we want those funds to be used. So an event may present us with a really unique sponsorship opportunity. Presenting sponsor, we have our name and logo all over everything. If it's meaningful, we might take that route, but more instances than not, we'll say the best use of this funds is if you would use this on marketing and promoting your event. And then how they do that, so event marketing means pre-event advertising media, so buying print, digital, social, outdoor spaces, all that, you know, the usual suspects there. appearing primarily outside of Pinellas County. So we did throw in that little caveat that, to drive visitation, you're going to need to promote outside the destination.
Chuck, if I could just be a little bit more direct, a position for an agency fee or a staff person to make the media buy, that would not be eligible for reimbursement. We would only reimburse the actual media spend.
Thank you. And it does say that in the definition as well. Only media costs are eligible.
Thank you.
Dylan?
That brings up a question I have. Say event promoter X has an event and they get 50% of funds allocated towards marketing, and you guys decide the title sponsor isn't the way to go. You want them to sponsor the event, and now they have a budget for media buy. How does that get kind of shepherded, right? If we're trying to make sure those funds are used well. Does VSPC look into how they are spent? Because like any old Joe Schmo can try social media advertising, but if you don't know how to do it, you don't get the bang for your buck.
And that's part of the application process is we ask for their media plan. So they have to lay out for us how they would spend those dollars. And we will provide that feedback. Hey, don't suggest putting dollars over here. You'd be more impactful over here. So we will weigh in on their proposed plans. So and then after the event, we got to make sure that they actually spent those dollars. So receipts are then provided to us and we verify everything before we reimburse. So that's more like reimbursement based.
Okay, so it's kind of like, all right, we spent X amount on a social media advertising campaign, and then we can see the results of that if they handled it well or not.
Bingo.
Got it.
Yes, sir.
And Captain Hubbard, I would also add to that, that's a good opportunity to just, again, make it clear that you'll see the funding amounts. They say up to. And the reason that is because they apply, we make a recommendation, we bring them to this body, you all make a recommendation, we then move that to the Board of County Commissioners, and they approve something. Because 50% of the funding is geared towards advertising and marketing, we want to make it clear that if after the event they come back and they did not do any of that, they will not receive that 50%. So we just wanted to make that crystal clear, why that up to is in there. Because a lot of times what we found is maybe the Board of County Commissioners will approve funding for an amount, and then after the fact, we're having to go back and work with them that, hey, guys, you didn't do any advertising or marketing. And then after the fact, we're trying to justify some of those expenses. So we wanted to avoid that and just make it crystal clear up front.
Highly unlikely this is going to happen, but just for clarification, Category 4 says 7,500 attendees and 40% of the attendees must be tourists. What if they had 14,000 attendees, which is not qualified for 3, but they had 40% of 7,500 in tourists? In other words, they didn't qualify. Well, it's hard to explain this.
Yeah, no worries. Let's go to this slide. So I think this is why you're seeing so many Category 5 events now under the proposed guidelines, where we were a little bit heavier on 3s and 4s. Those 3s and 4s did not meet the 40% threshold for tourists. So they had enough attendance, but they're now finding themselves in Category 5 because they're predominantly local attendees.
And maybe you're asking, what if you're at 14,000 attendees, 40% of which are tourists, so you're almost double what the Category 4 requirement is, but you're not quite at that Category 3. Is there an in-between? No, not under this system. They would just qualify as a Category 4.
What I was saying was if you had 14,000 attendees and your number of tourists equaled 40% of 7,500.
You'd be a Category 4.
Okay.
Steve's telling me I'm wrong, so come on up.
Yeah.
So I think if I'm understanding your question right, you have 14,000 attendees, but you don't have 40% of those 14,000. You're saying you have 40% of 7,500.
Right.
We did not factor that in. We are looking at the percentage of visitors that are coming to an event. We were not looking at the next tier down to see where that fell, if that makes sense. So the intent is to drive visitors. So if an event has 35% of its attendees, it does not meet that threshold, even if 35% of 14,000 is greater than 40% of 7,500. Right. Because that starts to get to be an impossible calculation to do every single time. So that's where the lines stand right now. Does that make sense?
And maybe, turn this way and speak into the mic so we can.
Sorry.
Make sure we're all hearing.
The question was, if you have an event with 14,000 attendees, and let's just make up a number, 30% of those are from out of town. So, and by tourists, by the way, we mean people who are greater than 20 miles away from the destination. That 30% of 14,000 would be greater than 40% of 7,500. So the question was, does that put you at a 3 or a 4? The way we have it right now is, if you don't make the 40% threshold, then you drop down to the next level. Does that, am I being clear?
Yeah. But I thought Phil was asking that if you hit the 40%, the and didn't work. It was or. In other words, you hit the 40, but you were under the attendees. I thought that's what you had asked.
So if you've got, yes, you would drop down to that. You would drop down to a level 4 event.
You need both.
Right, because now you would be greater than 7,500 people, and you would meet that threshold. I think are we saying the same thing? I don't know. I think I may have confused myself.
We're all saying the same thing in different ways.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, I'm glad I could really clarify that.
Yes, go ahead.
It might be helpful to clarify that, so I think under the statute, in order for us to fund an event, it has to have one of its main purposes, the attraction of tourists. So I think the 40% of whatever their audience is part of showing that one of its main purposes is advertising and marketing to tourists. So under Mr. Henderson's scenario, the larger event, maybe you would have more tourists in general, but the proportion of tourists for the event is smaller. So it's not, one of its main purposes isn't tourism, it's really more of a local event. I think that is part of what we're trying to hit with that 40%. I don't want to speak in term, Brian, but if that helps clarify why that is logically.
In that scenario, the 14,000 with 30% tourists doesn't work for any category. They wouldn't be eligible for funding. That makes sense?
They'd be in category 5.
40% of their audience is tourists.
You're
they
saying
don't qualify for anything.
Yes, no, you would qualify. That's where the 7,500 attendee requirement without the 40% under category 5.
Yeah.
So if you don't hit a 40%, you're penalized under this.
Oh, I see. Okay,
Yeah.
5. Is
You'll be
not
category
in.
5.
All right, so they drop all the way down, so. Okay.
So in the potential impact category, you had category 2 went up a couple. I assume it came from like category 3 or 4 or.
Correct. They bumped up from category 3 to 2.
So they lost a few. They lost 2 to that improvement, and then
4 went down to either category 4 or 5.
probably not 4.
True. Yeah, there's only one event there. Yep. So again, they had strong attendance, which gets them in at category 5, but they're local, mostly local events. So they're in that category, and again, we wanted to incentivize them to spend more out of market and drive visitation, get that number up.
So again, just to make me feel better about all of this, because I just worry about the change and on the fly. I mean, I think what we're doing is absolutely the right thing to do, just that transition. When we were looking at the 26 elite events last year, we gave everybody notice then that we were looking at a change for 27.
Well, there was not like, when we think county government notice and it's an official, like, hey, there's going to be a public hearing or something and there's a pamphlet or a document or a mail. It wasn't that official, but this board had a very thorough discussion on that. Craig said it in every presentation that he gave, that he had individually with the event organizers. And then when he did his webinar last year, he said that, hey, we're looking at these changes and don't get tied to this funding level, because next year, these are all subject to change.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Any other? Yes, Mayor.
Everything's crystal clear until we start asking questions. So I did have a few, actually. So let's just say that an event qualifies for, let's say, Category 3. And whenever they actually have the event, they fall short, slightly short. The funds allocated for that event, is it prorated and they get partial funding if they do fall a little flat?
That's a great question, and we thought about that. So because we're looking at the previous year's event, that's what we're making our determination on. If they, under your scenario, they would not be penalized this year, but next year when they apply, that's where they would be penalized for their attendance, their event of performance, for lack
And
of better
so they
terms.
would be automatically moved down into the next category?
Yeah,
Is that
the
correct?
following year, depending on how far their attendance figures drop and their visitor figures drop, that would impact their next year's request.
Great. All right. I think this is the right direction. We've been talking about this for several years now, and I'm very happy to see these changes, and I think it's also going to clear the air on what qualifies as an elite event. So I'm real happy with the outcome. Thank you very much.
Just thinking about it from an event perspective and playing devil's advocate for a minute, they were told change is coming. Now the change is clear. They see the change. They know how to adjust for it. But if you are one of those events that are getting penalized, you're seeing a 50% reduction in funding and then told to improve. That's a little bit challenging to improve on such a limited budget. Has there been any conversation around potentially seeing that reduction maybe stage in a little bit more, or maybe lessen that impact in that transition year? Or is 50% kind of the number we're stuck with?
Very good question, and I think that's kind of what we're talking about here on this phase-in approach, and how could we do it, and how long should that be? We struggled as a team to figure out how far do you extend that, because you start getting into multiple years, and you're always looking at last year's events. It could potentially get to the point where every single event is in flux every year. And then are they in that grace period or not? And then they get out of the grace period, then they're back in it. And it's just, I think that the team has kudos to them for, this is the third year that I've been with the team, and this is the third year that I'm bringing you all proposed changes to the same program. So they're constantly improving this, and the work doesn't stop when the BCC approves this program. Then the work actually just starts, and throughout the year, they're going through contracts, negotiating deliverables, and getting payments out. So I just think it would be very difficult to add to our team, you know, hey, let's do this over additional years, and then every year evaluate where you're at in a grace period and if you're in or out. And
Yeah, to that point, I wasn't suggesting making the grace period longer, because I agree there's already a ton of work, great work being done, and I agree we're going in the right direction. What I was saying is, if you're told to improve and then given 50% reduction, that's hard to improve on that budget. What I was saying is maybe looking at that 50% and maybe exploring that instead of 2-year phase-in where maybe the first year it's a 75% reduction and the next year it's 50% reduction, which would increase staff time and resources exponentially. Maybe the first year, that phase-in year is 75% reduced or 80% reduced or 60% reduced.
That's why we're bringing it here today, to you all to have that discussion.
Just to clarify, there's no guarantee it's a 50% reduction. It's up to 50%, correct?
The way it reads is if you are an event, and to use Craig's example, if last year you were we'll just say category 2, because I'm not good at math. You're a category 2 this current year and you received $150,000. Well, now based on these new measurement tools we have, you would only qualify for a category 5. So theoretically, you'd go from $150,000 to $25,000. What we're saying is we're not going to let you drop that far this year. So you're going to get $75,000, 50% of what you got. So it's the only events that are impacted are those that under the new criteria would drop to a category that would reduce their funding more than 50%.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to Clyde.
Thank you, Commissioner. One thought towards Dylan's comment is perhaps there could be a trigger by how much you missed that by. So if you miss by more than 25%, it goes to that 50%. But if you only miss by 5%, you only reduce by 25%. Some other criteria that you didn't totally, go off the rails, but you just missed it. Just a thought. That would.
And again, this year, because last year's, this year's, next year's. So next year's applications for funding are going to be based on the performance this year. This 26, correct? Yeah, so
Yes.
27's application, which are due when? When do they come in?
We haven't launched yet. We will in April.
April, okay. But so that application is going to be based on
6 event results.
26 results, which are in progress, and they'll have to update those as it goes along?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. So the new rules are evolving this year for people's application for next year.
Exactly right.
Yep. Okay. And I think to the point of transition, and that's kind of the conversation, I agree. I think extending it becomes a little bit complicated, and maybe it's just a less of that reduction in 27. We talked about up to 50%. Maybe that's where we talk about it. But I think getting into all the nuances are going to be, again, complicated. Like if you just missed it by this much, or if you missed it by this much, and it's just a lot. So maybe we just kind of say for this first year, maybe it's not 50%, maybe it's only a 25% reduction. But the next year, 28, it's going to be it's going to be determined based on the new standards or something. Again, I think we're trying to do what's right with our dollars, but at the same time, folks are right in the middle of a lot of planning, and they're kind of expecting. So I know the warning was out, but the system was not in place yet either. So it's just that. So that was my only thought on it. Phil, did you have another?
2 things. If an event falls to an area that's more than 50% lower, it should be more than 50% lower. I think 50% is pretty generous. They probably were lower than they should have been for several years. We just didn't catch it. So I think the 50% I think it's very generous. If an event goes from here way down to here, that we only take them to here for 1 year and give them the benefit of that while they readjust their thinking on it. So I think the 50% as it is generous and fair. Not to beat a dead horse, but if an event has 14,000 attendees and 4,200 of them, 30% of that are tourists, and they get category 5. But if an event has 75 or 8,000 and 3,200 are tourists, they get twice as much. I understand you're trying to keep it when we want tourism type events, but if they delivered more people and more tourists, but they don't get that category. I would suggest you change it to 7,500 and at least 3,000 attendees or tourists, and 15,000 attendees, at least 6,000 are tourists. And for an event that's almost twice as big as what is required by Category 4, they get put down to Category 5 because they didn't meet the 40%, although they delivered more than the Category 4 would at the minimum amount. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Oh, good. I'm glad it makes sense to you. I'm trying to follow as
No.
well, so.
Let's say you could, the way it stands right now, if you have 14,000 attendants and 30% of those are tourists, that's 4,200. Okay, that's more tourists and more attendees than 7,500 and 3,000, which is what 40% of 7,500 would be. So we're going to take that bigger event that provides more tourists and more attendees and more economic impact and put them back down to a lower category.
I hear you.
Does that make better sense?
Yep, I understand what you're saying.
So
yeah.
instead of saying 40%, I'd say the threshold is 7,500 and 3,000 attendees or tourists. So if you're 8,000 and 3,500, then you qualify. If you're 14,000 and 4,200, you qualify.
We can, I hear where you're going with that. For the sake of knowledge, I can tell you that scenario that you're suggesting, none of these events this current year are anywhere in that ballpark.
Well, as I said, when I opened it up, I said, it's probably not going to happen, but
Yeah.
it's somewhat flawed if it did. But
Most of the events that would qualify, well, all of the events that would, that this 50% rule, for lack of better terms, would apply to, are events that have less than 10,000 people, most of which have in that 5,000 or 6,000, and even less than that amount of people. So we're talking events with a few thousand people, and they don't have the 40%. So, but we could implement. We'd have to go back and do we won't be able to do the math today, but if we get, depending on the direction we get, we can go back and we understand what you're suggesting.
I think one event which an advisory capacity on a board is Clearwater Jazz Holiday. They do have quite a few people to attend normally. Last year they didn't. It was not as good. They're rebuilding. But in past years they've had a number of attendees, but they haven't had 40% tourists. But they've had more than 3,000 tourists. So they would be kicked all the way down to 5 when they've produced what Category 4 is requiring.
Yeah,
That's just one.
Yeah, either the math has to be tweaked a little bit, as you're saying, or we have to provide an opportunity for this group to make recommendations on those that don't meet those standards. Like these are the groups these 5 are the ones that are going to drop, and we have an opportunity to subjectively, which is not on this board, make a different recommendation to the county commission. I mean, because you can't capture everything. Maybe the math that you end up coming up with captures everything, I'm not sure. But I just think that at some point, your all's experience and what you think is good for this county from the tourism standpoint, I don't know, I'd like to have some kind of filter that says, I get all that, but these 3 events, gosh, they're so close. They're on everything. We feel still good about recommending a Category 3 when they should have technically been a Category 4 or something. I don't know. I don't want to make it too subjective, but I do think there's got to be an avenue for this group and their wisdom to say, hey, we think, despite all of that, we still think this, and I don't know how that works. So maybe the math will fix it. I don't know.
And maybe I can use the words that a wise attorney once told me. This is not ordinance. This is not state statute. These are simply the guidelines to give our staff direction to evaluate and administer this program. Our recommendation that we bring here is simply a staff recommendation, and you all have it within your purview to make different recommendations. And furthermore, the Board of County Commissioners has ultimate authority to make further recommendation, so.
So my recommendation is get rid of 40% and take a hard number that's 40% of your attendees, your minimum attendees. That fixes it. 40% of 7,500 is 3,000. So say 7,500 attendees, of which 3,000 have to be tourists. So if you have 14,000 or 4,200, you qualify. Instead of a percentage, make it a hard number of the minimum number of attendees. That fixes everything on every one of those. It's an easy fix if you want to go with that.
And to that point, what you were saying, Amanda, was it statutorily, it has to be a tourism-driven event. So that example of a 13,000 event, I'm sorry, I'm not as good as math, but if they had a smaller number of tourists compared to the total visitors, it wouldn't qualify.
Yeah, that could potentially be an issue. Obviously, talking hypotheticals is difficult, but we would need to evaluate each on a case-by-case basis. And with our marketing funds, we can spend them wherever we want. But for operational funds, if we're talking about giving the event funding to actually host the event, run the event, that's where we need to show under the statute that it is one of its main purposes is marketing to tourists. So I think implementing Mr. Henderson's suggestion would potentially create some questions about that, which we would have to do analysis of case by case.
Just one last comment. What is a better event? One that produces 4,200 tourists or one that produces 3,000 tourists?
From a statutory perspective, it's not about what's better, it's what meets the statutory criteria. So 40% is, a percentage is more.
Is that in the statute somewhere?
It's not a percent, the percentage is not in the statute. One of its main purposes is the language in the statute.
Okay.
So trying to figure out how to determine what one of its main purposes is why I have a job. So we can evaluate each of these as they come in, but I think that what staff has put together is a good approximation of a way to do that. And I think Commissioner Eggers' point of, you know, these guidelines can be waived in certain circumstances at your discretion, so.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would support a motion that put a hard number on the percentages versus a percentage for the exact reason that you stated. If it's 3,000, then state it as 3,000, and that will solve everybody's problem. You're still happy because you wanted 3,000 at least people, but all of a sudden if you're in a category 4, and you didn't hit 15,000. So if you just by putting that hard number, you're going to eliminate the fella who got so many more attendees, but now his attendance of tourists benchmark is so much higher, he might not be able to no longer be in a category 4, even though he's so much better event than his competition in a category 4. We can solve this, as Phil said, by just putting a hard number. So if he wants to make a motion, I certainly would second and support that.
I'd like to make that motion, to make a hard number instead of a percentage. On every word it says 40%, change that to the actual number, which is 40% of the total attendees.
So on this, just again, to be clear, you're talking about a number 3 and 4 and 5? Or
I'm talking about all of them. Anywhere it says 40%, change that to what the actual number is. 40% of 40,000, that's 16,000 on category 1.
If it's a minimum threshold, it should be a minimum threshold.
16,000 people in that case you're talking about.
In category 1, instead of 40%, I would make it 16,000 people. In category 2, and I would, same thing, 16,000. In category 3, I would make it 6,000 instead of 40%. 6,000 tourists. In category 4, I would make it 3,000 instead of 40%. In category 5, I would make it 2,000 instead of 40%. So you have 5,000 attendees, 2,000 have to be tourists. If you have 10,000 and you have 3,000 of those are tourists, you've exceeded both requirements of that category. So you should be funded at that level, I would think. It creates more bed tax, it creates more economic impact. It creates more of everything.
I hear you. I'm saying, is that crystal clear to everybody? here, around, Clyde?
My only comment too is the example you keep giving is 14,000, that you still wouldn't go to category 3 because you wouldn't have 6,000 unless by chance out of that 14,000, 6,000 were tourists, but you still don't hit the 15,000 threshold.
What I was saying is if you had 14,000 and only 30% were tourists, you wouldn't qualify for category 4.
Right, because you have to have 15,000 attendees.
No,
So you wouldn't qualify
category
anyways.
4 is 7,500 and 3,000 or 40% of that. So I'm saying if you have 14,000, which doesn't qualify you for 3, but it does qualify you for 4 if you don't use a percentage, if you use a hard number. You can a better event gets kicked down to a lower funding level.
Okay.
I mean, something with no tourists.
Thank you. That
no
makes
tourists,
sense.
No good.
Anybody else? Yes, Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. What you've proposed, Phil, makes perfect sense. And the reason why, if you just do the math, 40,000 attendees, 40% of those attendees would be 16,000. Now, let's say that no more were tourists, but suddenly that number was 50,000 attendees. Well, you don't meet the 40% mark anymore, and that would disqualify you from category 1. So this makes perfect sense, giving it a hard number, and that solves the problem.
Good, I'm glad you're clear. That's why I was asking, you know. Folks around here are comfortable with it. Any thoughts on your end or your staff's, any perspectives from?
We fully understand it, and I do think it accounts for a situation that could occur, and this would fix that. This accounts for some of the unintended consequences that could occur.
So we have a motion and a second on that.
Second.
Yeah. On that suggested change to the criteria. Anything else?
Now, I would just put the caveat, because we have not run the numbers, I don't know what the impact is gonna be on the total funding amount. So just keep that in mind. If this comes back and now, you know, half of these events increase in funding, we've got a budget of $3 million. That's in the tourist development plan. So I can't promise I won't come back and ask for additional funding, or we may, again, unintended consequences, some events that would qualify today may not qualify because there's just not enough money in that program. I'm not saying either of those is going to happen, but I just put that caveat on there. So
I would
it
amend
probably
my
will
motion
not.
to be, make that change as long as your findings don't create another problem.
Second, are okay with that?
Second, as amended.
Okay. Trish?
I have a question. This still is and, correct? Okay.
All right.
Except for category 5, the or.
I guess words matter. All right. All in favor? Excuse me.
No, you're right. Point of order. We do need to vote. Sorry.
Yeah, that's where I was going. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Dylan.
Phil's great example took away from what we were talking about originally about the reduction. Is there any appetite for looking at that reduction? It seemed like Phil brought up that if they were missing the mark for many years, I see your point and it makes sense. But are we sticking with that 50% reduction if they didn't meet the mark? Because it seems hard to improve if you're met with such a reduction.
And we're really talking about this year's results for next year's application.
Yes, but again, if your event happened in October, November, January, you know, it's already, now you're seeing this and you're like, oh.
Right, I understand. Mayor?
I was going to save this for later, but this Clearwater Invitational we had this past weekend, the softball tournament at college, ESPN broadcast all 40 games on one of their platforms. Some were SEC Network, but the number I watched on television were ESPN2 or ESPN on Sunday night primetime game where Nebraska upset Texas Tech, was the #1 team in the country. I've asked them for how many views we got on 40 broadcasts all across the country. If you watched any of it, repeatedly talking about Clearwater, talking about Business Bank, we were all over every broadcast, mentions of our destination. And drone shots coming and going, not just Clearwater, but all of our Pinellas County beaches and St. Petersburg. It was just fantastic. But, you know, and I don't know what we contributed to that offhand, but we got value for every penny. Visit St. Pete Clearwater. But that event doesn't probably happen unless Shriners Children's is the lead sponsor. And they were all over, you know, they had kids with who had, you know, prosthesis and things coming out, throwing every first pitch. They got their value. And that's what I would say to, you know, cutting back 50%, probably if that's where they're at now, as far as the kind of event they're running, they're probably missing an opportunity to find a lead sponsor who could appeal to more of those locals who are attending their event. And I don't know that Visit St. Pete Clearwater has been, if they become that dependent upon our money, when really historically maybe, you know, they shouldn't have been. I don't know that it's necessarily, you know, we should be making that up. 50%, I think it's fair to cut back to encourage them to look for that local lead sponsor like Shriners Children to get in there. Because I think a number of our organizations that have been running these events in the past, maybe they've not been looking hard enough for that you know, corporate sponsor or somebody. And maybe, and I get it, it's not easy. You don't just go out there and somebody writes a check. But hopefully it'll encourage them to look for that local sponsor that might appeal to those who are currently attending.
Mayor, on that point, I mean, when you're out looking for a sponsor like that, it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, so
Well,
this is
they'd
the whole point about, you know, maybe a little less of an impact because it may take a while to get that. But your
Well, if they
thought?
become that, I feel for them, but I also think they probably made a mistake if they become that dependent on Visit St. Clearwater as the biggest part of their budget. And I don't think 50% on the front end is you know, too drastic. For some it may be, because maybe they have been relying upon this entity's contribution too much. But I think it's fair. It's much more fair than cutting them off altogether, which we could do. But I think it allows them a transition.
So just for, again, the vote we took was on the package that was recommended, plus the one change that Phil made that motion on. So it's been voted on. If we want to readdress it, it would take another vote. I will make sure. Is that what? Okay. All right. Right now, we're set. We're done. We're just having this like after the fact conversation about this number, which if we feel good about it, we can change that with a second vote. But yes, Dylan.
I was under the impression we were voting on just the motion.
Well, that's why I brought it up.
Okay.
And she was nodding her head, yes, that's what we did. We did the package deal, so.
I got you.
But it doesn't mean we can't go back. I mean, we can change that right now. If there was people say, well, no, let's make it 75% for that first year, and then we're done, we can do that too. We can do that if we want to do that. I think that just warranted some more conversation anyway, so. Any other thoughts on that transition year, which is really the 27, fiscal year 27? Yes, Doreen.
Comment and disclaimer, I have not ever been personally involved in an event. Some of our colleagues have, and certainly appreciate their expertise. Kind of, Mayor, you know, parroting what you were saying, and this had been the thought in my mind, for the smaller events. I think the focus, they don't necessarily have, you know, robust PR or advertising marketing experience, and they build these events. But going forward, they've been looking, well, in the past, they've been building attendance. And so the focus now is they need to be looking at what they can do based on our requirements. I mean, it's tourism. We need to bring the people in outside the 20-mile radius, all of these things. And I think that our team, VSPC, is offering them the opportunity to expand what they need to do. So if you're looking at that event, they need to be reaching out to out-of-state to bring in not only the visitors, but like the fishing teams and things like that for tournaments. So this is a way that they can be helped and given more guidance on how they need to be focusing on getting those out of town attendees to meet the criteria and be able to continue getting their funding.
Yeah, I think everybody, we're all kind of in agreement. That's a good point, Doreen, on that. I just think it was just dealing with next year, the fiscal year 27. So I'm not hearing necessarily an appetite in the room to reopen that and change it to 75%. Is that what I'm, oh, did you have something? I'm sorry, Russ.
I think I'm fine with it. The only thing is, we are 6 months into the fiscal year already.
Yeah.
So there's a 6-month period of
Yeah.
time, and you're basing it on that for next year. And I'm not sure either way, but that's, the only thing is you're halfway through the year right now. And those applications are April, it starts?
Yeah.
That's the only thing.
Yeah, that was my concern too. That was the reason I was concerned about it a little bit on the transition. But I mean, unless I hear a motion to amend what we just approved, I'm not seeing or hearing it. So we'll, yep, Dylan.
Yeah, to that point, I was proposing it for discussion, so I don't feel super strongly, and I think some good points were made.
Yeah.
I just wanted to have a conversation around that, because to me, again, putting myself in an event organizer's shoes and hearing, oh, 50% reduction, you got to improve, that's a tough pill to swallow, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, I think they probably would say, yeah, I get it. I think it's probably the right thing, but oh my gosh, this year, it's like that was my only concern. So yeah. Okay, well, we'll have. I'm sure there'll be some of that discussion at the next level, but I think we're all comfortable with the package that we voted on. So, all right, you're up.
Excuse me, Chair.
Yes.
Do we need to at least vote to approve as amended by Mr. Henderson?
It was, the way that I heard the motion, I did understand that it was adopting the whole package with that change.
Yeah,
However, if it would be helpful to clarify.
Well, that was the way I took it as well. There were some questions here, so I think we did that. We made that. I read it that way. Again, Dylan, you asked the question whether we did that. So let's just, for clarity, let's get another motion on the package that was recommended by staff with the amendment that Phil brought to the table, so that we have a clear signal that we've adopted a program. So let's do that again.
I would like to make that motion as amended.
With the staff's recommendation, but as amended by, as we discussed.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Second.
And we have a second from Clyde. All right, any other comments? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, well, thank you for doing that a second time, just to make sure that we had it covered. Appreciate those comments and thoughts. You're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to start off with, I don't do this often enough, and I'm going to get into the habit of doing it, but just recognizing our staff for their dedication, their longevity in many cases, not only to the Visit St. Pete Clearwater team, the entire organization, but also the destination. And I want to recognize 4 team members. The first 2 are on our advertising and marketing side. So first one is here, and you heard from him earlier this morning, Eddie Kirsch. He's celebrating 5 years with Visit St. Pete Clearwater, so shout out to Eddie. And if you can believe it or not, for those of you that have been on this Tourist Development Council for a number of years, our very own Katie Bridges is celebrating 15 years with the organization. She's hopefully back. I'm sure if I know her, she is not watching. She's back making it happen. And 2 other folks from our sales team. We've got Gail Yeager, who's been on the U.S. Leisure sales team. She's celebrating 20 years of service with the organization. and Hortensia Simmons, who many of you know with the Meetings and Conferences team. She's also celebrating 20 years of service with the organization. So I've been with the organization for almost 13 years, and it feels like I've been there a long time. So to have a number of individuals within the team that have been there for over 20 years is pretty special, and I just want to shout out to the team and boost those 20-year numbers up as well. Next, I want to, fresh hot off the press, we've got some news for you. Not only America's Best Beaches is not just a tagline, we've got the data to prove that it's real. And yesterday, TripAdvisor, big deal, they put out their awards for the best of categories. And our very own Clearwater Beach is rated as the #2 beach in the United States of America. And it's the top beach in the state of Florida. And it's also among the top beaches in the world. In fact, it's the only Florida beach to receive the recognition and one of only 3 in the entire United States. So give it up for Clearwater Beach. That's not all. People come here, they want to be outside, they want to take advantage of our outdoors and our nature activities. Well, we've got the best way to do that, the best in the U.S. Our very own Get Up and Go kayaking at Shell Key, #1 in the U.S. and #2 in the world. That's not all. It was rated #8 as the best overall experience in the United States. So shout out to Get Up and Go kayaking. We also like to do sailing and day cruises. Little Toot comes in at #4 in the United States for best sailing and day cruise. Best pet-friendly restaurant, OCC Roadhouse, came in at #3 in the United States. And bringing us in for a landing, we like to eat, and we've got some great dining establishments. Carrata on the Gulf in the Sand Pearl Resort, rated #11 in the U.S. and the only Florida restaurant on the list. So shout out to all of our partners for being recognized by such a reputable partner. And we'll look forward to seeing if any of those make the exclusive Besties Awards later this year. So thank you.
Congratulations, Mayor.
I do.
Yeah.
I did also just want to say, not only do we have so many marvelous partners in the destination that are recognized for how great they are, but we've got some great events here, and the mayor touched on one of the most recent events in Clearwater with the Shriners Softball Invitational. But over the last, it's like someone flips a switch in mid-December, and over the course of the last 2 weeks, we've had 4 of the MLS teams that we partner with in town for their spring training. We've got both of our MLB teams in town now, kicking off spring training this weekend. There's some other sporting events going on. Last weekend, if anyone was in downtown St. Pete, it was epic down there. There were at least 5 large-scale events down there, and we can't do that without our partners at the city level. Certainly in Clearwater, their Parks and Recs team, second to none. Down in St. Petersburg with their events team, and it's not over. We're just getting started. In the next month, we've got 2 Category 1s that you heard about in elite events. They both happen in the next month with the Grand Prix and the Valspar Championship. So we look forward to the events that are happening now and the events that are coming up the rest of the spring. And I do encourage everyone on this Tourist Development Council, you guys and your support, your guidance, you guys play a big role in making those happen. And I hope that you all will be able to join us at some of those events and represent the destination. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That was some exciting news. Love it. Board, any comments, things you want to bring up before we adjourn? Anybody? All right, then we are adjourned, and we'll see you next month.